Well, welcome everybody. This is a return of sorts to what was the Why Social podcast, but it's back in a little bit of a different way. I am here with Alexa Heinrich, and I'm very excited to be having this conversation today. In particular, this conversation comes about a big reason in part because I have a course at UNL that I'm teaching on two different levels. And part of it is I want to bring professionals in the room who are making an impact and have a lot of great advice to share. And I felt like it was almost unfair to hide some of the great knowledge that is coming into the classroom. And so I decided to make it a live piece. And I want to, first and foremost, to you, Alexa, say thank you so much, because this kind of, we talked about this, but this came about real quick. So thanks for joining me tonight.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Now, before you introduce yourself, I want to take a brief moment too, just to send congratulations, because as we are recording this, you were also just awarded an award from Sprout Social as being always on. And it's an appropriate award, I certainly believe, and you're very deserving. So I want to take that moment also to say congratulations on your success and winning that award.
Thank you. I was very excited.
Well, with that, I think it's only opportune that before we get going that you take a moment and just share a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and ultimately what makes you tick. Because I think in the long run, one thing that's very interesting about, I think, professionals in this industry is not just what they're knowledgeable on, but who are they, what's important to them. And we don't always get to see that. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself with everybody who's watching. And I know you know some of these people, but again, I want to make sure that my class and some people who may not know you get a chance to learn a bit more about you.
Sure. So I am Alexa. I typically go by Alex, but I answer to both because Amazon has stolen my name. I am originally from Chicago. I now live in Florida, where I am the social media manager for St. Petersburg College on the Gulf Coast. So now I live in beautiful weather most of the time, which is great. And I'm a huge advocate for accessibility on social media and digital spaces, inclusive content. And I kind of just fell into that particular area of social media a few years ago. I had a digital strategist who was asking me, is there alt text on our web sliders? And I had no idea what she was talking about. And there wasn't. So I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know I was supposed to do that. Did more research around it, realized, oh, you can do a lot of this stuff for social. And just, it was kind of logical to me to want to do this stuff. Like, yes, we should be doing more for everyone, so everyone can enjoy the content we put out, the messages that we put out there. So I'm a huge advocate for that, as most people at this point know. I talk about it all the time. But yeah, that's pretty much me. I'm loud and blunt, and the personality that you get on Twitter is twice as loud in reality most of the time.
Well, let's kind of dig into this. Let's just start at the basics. What is accessibility in 2020? How do you describe it?
So for me, when I'm talking about accessibility, I'm talking about pretty much the basics, how to be technically accessible so your content can be consumed by users who have hearing disabilities or vision disabilities. So, you want to be throwing the alt text on your images. You want to be making sure that your copywriting is accessible, that you're captioning your videos that you post, stuff like that. So I consider the information that I share kind of the basic of the basics. Like, it's super easy to implement. It's it's easy to understand and kind of get started on. So I don't really go crazy technical or anything like that, because there's a lot of ways to be inclusive. So I am the basic of the basics.
But the basics are extremely important. And is it fair to say that most people, or a lot of people, I don't want to say most, that may not be fair, but that a lot of people don't know the basics, and that a lot of accounts are barely hitting the basics at this day, at this kind of time and space, in particular in social media, where really a few years ago, no one seemed to even be thinking about it?
I would say, yeah, that's a fair assessment, especially within the social media professional community, because I get people all the time still who said, I didn't know this. I didn't know I should be doing this. And I think a huge part of that is the fact that the platforms themselves don't really stress accessibility. It was only a few years ago that Instagram added the ability to add alt text. And, Twitter just a few months ago made it so that you don't have to turn that feature on. Twitter is doing more, as we kind of like chatted on Twitter about when you CC'd me on that blog post about how they're making a huge effort and they're being really transparent about it, which is super impressive to me and very promising. So yeah, having the platforms do more is going to be huge. So I'm really excited about Twitter kind of trying to do more about this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. What platforms are doing it well right now? What platforms, how do you grade the platforms, I guess I would say, right now in terms of actually taking care of accessibility? And just for record and dating purposes, I mean, we're talking in the start of fall 2020. So it's still early by a lot of means in terms of accessibility standards happening in the space, because as you mentioned, Twitter used to hide it behind a wall. I mean, you used to have to turn it on. So how's everybody doing? You mentioned Twitter. What about Facebook and some of these other emerging platforms? In particular, you've got TikTok and other places that could probably be doing some good things if they took the time.
So last I heard, TikTok wants to try to figure out how to add a captioning, either auto or manual captioning feature to their platform. I haven't dug into that. I was obsessed with TikTok for the first 2 months of the pandemic, and then my attention went, ooh, a butterfly, and went somewhere else. So I I got bored with all the dancing. Um, Facebook and Instagram, which we all know is a Facebook owned product, they both rely, their AI can auto generate alt text for their images, but it's usually pretty bad, very vague. Wouldn't consider it alt text by any means, but you can go in and edit their alt text. So they're okay. But my big thing is that Instagram, which has a Twitter account, they don't add alt text to their images on Twitter. So I don't feel like accessibility is a priority to them. LinkedIn makes it really obvious when you upload an image how to add alt text. It says right in the corner, add description or add alt text. So I appreciate that they're just like, hey, it's right here. You don't have to go looking for it, because you have to do that with Facebook and Instagram still, because they're going to assume that no one's going to use it anyway. So, Instagram, you got to slide down, go to a new screen, slide down, go to another screen. But yeah, I would say that Twitter is probably doing the best, and that LinkedIn is behind them just for transparency. But yeah, they could all be doing better.
So they could all be doing better. I think that's a statement we can say about a lot of things in social media, but so no surprise here in that regard. Let's talk a little bit about, though, some of these very specific features that exist on these platforms. You mentioned video. What can people do with videos? Because there are manual things that we can do to fix our videos. And I know they're time consuming, but I would imagine you would argue it's worth the time to make the edits and to add that accessibility and make it more accessible for everyone.
Yes, 100%. I don't have to do it a lot. At my last job, I would have to, because we didn't have we had a small video team. So if I had video that I wanted to put on social and the video team was busy, I knew how to upload it to YouTube, go in, edit either the auto-generated subtitles that YouTube will try to provide based on what it hears. It does its best and usually does pretty decently. Or, just typing along with the video and adding my subtitles, which when you do it often enough, you get pretty fast at it. And then now I really don't need to do that a whole lot, because our video team has more bandwidth for stuff like that. They're pretty good about adding captions for our videos, but I still occasionally go into YouTube. And then for short videos, I actually have an app on my phone for if I need to record videos for my own social to caption it as I speak, and then I can go in and edit it. So if I want to throw just like a 10-second video up on like my Instagram story, I can caption it, because Instagram stories, Facebook stories, Snapchat, whatever, they don't have any of those features built in, and they're hugely inaccessible still. So
It's interesting that you note that too, because I use just the Google Voice program that is in particular on Android phones,
right.
and that's how I do it. So when I ever need to create one for anything or create a file, that's how I do it and bring it over to Google Docs. So there's a lot of different ways we can do it that don't take us long. Now, something you've talked a lot about that I think is really important. We also communicate through other means. That's visuals, that's GIFs, that's memes, that's emojis. These all bring their own challenges. Let's start with emojis, because I believe you've talked about emojis a few times, and you've talked about, at least if you're going to use them, pop them at the end, don't put them in the middle. And what should we do with emojis? Are emojis a big problem for accessibility?
I don't think they're a big problem when you use them strategically and intentionally. Well, I mean, people can use them intentionally and use them poorly, but being smart about where you're using them. So for people who don't know, there is metadata for every emoji icon. Even the ones with different skin tones have an extra layer of description, so that if a screen reader, which is inclusive technology, comes across it in a tweet or a post, it knows how to describe it aloud. So I always try to use my emojis at the end of posts and tweets. I don't use a lot of them. I try to avoid any of the humanoid emojis, just so that I don't have to use skin tones. And I don't have to run into the problem of, well, what race is this particular emoji? So I just stick with like the smiley face ones and the animals and food and stuff. So it's pretty basic. It's just, try not to overload your content with emoji. Don't throw things in the middle, because when it's read aloud, it may not make sense. If you're throwing a pizza slice in the middle of a sentence, is it still going to make sense when it says pizza slice?
That's a good point. And I'll actually cut away for a moment just to say one thing I did in the past in my career was I managed mobile for a university. I also worked on a mobile app. I had to do some very basic coding. I did not really do coding. I typed things in and it did the work for me. But one thing that I had to do was manage the accessibility. And it was amazingly challenging when I went and I used the features that people are using these every day, what they have to go through to experience and all this content. I found it remarkable how challenging it was for me. And I was barely using it, but I imagine they get used to it. But still, I want to say it, if you get a chance, activate this feature on your phone, everybody, and see what it's like to look at content through a screen reader.
Yeah, I turn mine on probably at least every other day, just because I'm always testing content and I get curious about, what does that sound like through my screen reader? And when I first started using it, I was just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? How do I scroll? I don't have a home button on my iPhone anymore. So I'm like, how do I switch between apps? So it's learning, okay, there's the 3-finger scroll, and then there's pulling up on the screen until you feel 2 vibrations. And I was like, this is intense. So it's really worth it for people, even if you don't need that feature, you should try it. Try navigating the digital space or social media with that feature and see what people who do need to use it experience on a daily basis.
I agree. Now, to get a little bit back where we were, I do want to say, what about GIFs? What can people do with GIFs and those sort of things just to make them more accessible? Because obviously there's a lot of popular GIFs out there. I think people know with me, I'm dropping a Captain America GIF or a That's So Fetch GIF or something. but what does it mean to someone through a screen reader? What do we have to add so they understand what the hell that content even is?
So on Twitter, if you're using their web platform or the mobile version, the mobile app, if you're using their Jiffy library, you can add alt text super easy to the GIFs. And I'm sorry, Chris, I'm going to say GIF. I'm
It's
real
all right.
sorry about that. But you can add alt text to the GIFs. And it's kind of funny because since they added that feature a few months ago, which I was really stoked about, it makes you really think about the GIFs you use, because I don't want to choose one that's super complicated because that's really hard to add alt text to. So, if it was the little cat with the rainbow behind it going across the screen, like, how do I describe that? Like, okay, the little cat going across the screen with a rainbow behind it. What does that mean? So, yeah, it makes you really conscious of the content that you are putting out to the world, which is true of all content when it comes to accessibility. Like, you want to be intentional about the images or graphics that you're choosing. So, but yeah, adding alt text for GIFs is always interesting.
But if you're using it on another platform, is it something like adding description and then words, or is there anything you can do to kind of compensate for the lack of accessibility features?
It would be. It would be if you were to throw a GIF onto LinkedIn, and I've never attempted to do that because that doesn't seem like the platform for it. But I would probably put in brackets GIF and then try and describe the GIF like at the bottom of my post, because I don't know the capabilities for GIF alt text on the different platforms. I've never attempted it. I try to add alt text where possible. And if it's not possible, then I'm just not going to use that piece of content.
No, it's a good point. And it's how we think about our content, especially as we represent our organizations. One question that did come in that I think is important, I want to pose it to you now, which is how can you, or how have you helped an organization actually prioritize accessibility? What advice would you give in that department? Because I imagine for some, it still is a brand new world. And, as you go up to the C-suite level, it's nowhere near their mind. They don't care.
Yeah, no, my big priority is always that we should just care about other people. I say it in every single presentation talk that I do about accessibility, that you should just care about your fellow human. But I have totally used the guilt trip of, well, that's not compliant. There aren't concrete laws around accessibility for social media yet, but higher education institutions, we want to be accessible. That is something that there's a great fear of not being accessible. So, there's always that argument. And then just as marketers, why would you not want your message to reach as many people as possible? Why would you not want a bigger audience for your content? So if you're not being accessible, then you're potentially leaving out this huge demographic of people that may want to, pay for your service or buy your product or listen to your story. So again, really your main priority should be, well, we just care about the experience of other people, but there's always the marketing and the legal arguments to make around accessible content that might hit home more for the C-suite.
Yeah, and I guess if you were talking to someone who was saying, well, I only have so much time in my day, and it's going to take me, say, an extra 45 minutes to go caption this video or something along those lines, because I know for a fact that there's at least one or two solo social media managers listening. What do you say to those people in regards to, that's a task that's up to them? What's the advice you give to them? Because I think they're going to have to explain to people, why do you have to take 45 minutes to do this when you could be doing other stuff?
Yeah, that's a really hard conversation to have, because there are so many single person social media teams, which is why I try to stress that, this is not only the responsibility of social media managers and digital communicators. It is a conversation to have with management, with leadership, with administration, of everyone should care about this, because No, I don't expect, someone who's already juggling, a dozen plates that are on fire to suddenly be able to do this. Because if they're not given the resources, the time, the bandwidth to do it, it's not going to happen. So that it's not even something that I can tell a social media manager who's a team of one of you should be doing this. It's me telling their leadership, you should be supporting your social team.
There's there's only so many people watching, but I can guarantee you any social media manager who maybe listened to this at any point is clapping at that, because there are a lot of teams of one. When it comes down to it, what kind of resources do you recommend to people? I obviously would say, hey, please follow you. But outside of that, what kind of resources, what people do you recommend for staying up to date on this? Because it does change. I know you and I discussed this. We don't know all the details at this point, but Twitter's announced more things of accessibility today. So you'll see more from Twitter. But and we found that out through Twitter. So I think Twitter is a resource on this. But, where do you go? How do you stay up to date?
So I do have a list on my Twitter for digital accessibility that as I come across people who are advocates or experts for this, or they're, Twitter able, Twitter ally, Twitter accessibility, they have a couple accounts out there for it. I add them to the list so that I'm able to stay on top of it. I cannot say enough great things about Erica Baltz, who is someone else from, our community of higher ed social media. She's no longer in higher ed, but she is just like, I idolize her so much. She is so good at what she does and she really knows her stuff. Like, again, I'm the basics of accessibility for social media, whereas Erica talks about so many different ways to be inclusive that go beyond accessibility. She talks about inclusive content for people who are neurodivergent, who have dyslexia, autism on the spectrum. She's just so good at what she does. And she actually has a workshop coming up later this month that I'm really excited to tune in for, donate to her cause, support it in whatever way I can. So yeah, she is just an outstanding resource when it comes to this sort of thing. I idolize Erica. She knows her stuff.
I know Erica. I have met Erica. I've talked to Erica, and she certainly is fantastic. So I would double down on what you just said. Definitely go check that out. I will say, of course, stay in touch with you too, because I think again you continue to share the knowledge, and the passion for it stands out. And I just want to say I think it's really important in these industries that we have the passion for what we do, but we also know how to focus in what we do well. And you're doing that in so many ways. When it comes down to it, is there just kind of to take us into, if anyone has questions, by the way, please feel free to drop them in the comments at this time. If you haven't, happy to bring them to the table. But before we go to that, in case any questions are in the queue, what is the thing you would say to anyone who is looking to jump into social? Because I think it's important. It goes with accessibility, but what's the advice you give to people who are looking to jump into social media in some professional manner? And in terms of telling them how they may find success in the future, what advice do you give them?
Well, since the pandemic, I would encourage anyone to, jump with both feet into, whatever industry you're looking to do social for. But there is a huge, huge community of people who now talk to each other on Twitter that are in marketing, they're in hospitality, they're in transportation, higher education, all sorts of industries. And we're all just kind of boosting each other all the time, which I really love. It's a really supportive community, and it helps you kind of find people who are experts in different subjects. They're experts in accessibility or B2B marketing, social media strategy, stuff like that. So it's you want to connect with your people. It's you shouldn't have to go in and feel like, well, I'm the only person doing this. It's totally not true. There's so many people that want to connect with you and help you and be like, oh yeah, I know someone in such and such organization.
And there is no better, I guess it's important to say this, there's no better community than the social media community for this, because whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, there is someone who's willing to step up and help. And it comes down to the fact that social media is built for community. So there's a tremendous bit of advice there that I hope people take a look at and follow. I will give people a minute or two, if you do have any questions, to feel free to drop them in. I do want to take a moment to, of course, thank you for joining me. Thank you on behalf of my class and the greater social media community on continuing to share this information. I know you could share so much more than what we did in a short time, but I think we hit on some very important points. And Callie asked why we're both so cool. That's a very nice question, Callie. I don't know, but that's true, at least in one way for me. So, but I appreciate the question. I will say I do appreciate you taking the time to join, though. And when it comes down to it, thank you for being a part of the social media community. Continue to share. And again, as I like to say, I like to stress, thank you for being a part of a drive to share, not for anything more than wanting to help others, because that is what I think is inherently needed in all spaces right now. So thank you for that. We do have another congratulations for you on your award. And at this time, I'm going to say we're going to shut this down. Thank you for everyone who did join to my UNL class. I hope you've taken something away from this and learned a few new things about accessibility. And I will be following up, of course, with all of you in terms of assignment related to. And with that, I'm going to close the broadcast. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and have a wonderful day, evening, or whatever it is where you are at this time.